and in Olympia? Individual citizens or PACs, political action committees? Just a month after the election, the Public Disclosure Commission is finding out just who spent how much in an effort to elect a certain candidate or to pass or defeat an initiative proposal. And there's little question but that plenty of money flowed into political coffers this past November. On the initiatives, over $932,000 was spent by the Committee for Litter Control and Recycling in their effort to stop a mandatory bottle and can deposit law. The committee was funded by the Glass and Can Packaging Institutes, aluminum companies, and grocery stores, among others. The group supporting a bottle bill, Citizens for a Cleaner Washington, spent just over $284,000. Initiative 414 lost. A measure to repeal the sales tax on food, to make changes in the B&O taxes, and to institute a 10% corporate profits tax also failed. The group supporting Initiative 435 was financed by contributions from the Washington State Labor Council and state employee associations and Jim McDermott's campaign fund. They spent about $23,000. The group opposing Initiative 435, Kill 435 Now, spent almost $400,000 to defeat the measure. Much of the money came from large contributions from companies like Boeing and Safeco, Rainier Bank, and Burlington Northern. Initiative 412, a proposal to put a lid on interest rates, also went down to defeat. Support for the initiative came primarily from the Washington State Labor Council and other unions. They spent just over $275,000. But the opposition, the People for Fair Consumer Credit, outspent them with a total of almost $1,500,000. Most of that money came from department stores and banks here in our state. The J.C. Penney Company alone spent $600,000 to defeat the interest lid proposal. Hello, I'm Bryon Johnson, and welcome to Viewpoint on the News. Today, we'll talk about campaign financing and probably also redistricting and a few other subjects with our Secretary of State, Ralph Munro. Ralph, I understand you're more than just a little bit concerned when somebody spends, say, $1.5 million to defeat an initiative. Not because you supported it, but because that's a whale of a lot of money. What's wrong with money?
Well, the trouble is we've reached the point where the amounts have gotten so large that it's bringing undue influence into the whole system. And I'm really more concerned about individual candidate elections than I am about the particular issue elections. But the whole money picture is just absolutely obscene, and there's no other way to describe it. And I think it's time that we began to take a look at some potential lids to ensure that decisions rest really with the public rather than with big money interests.
Many years ago, Ralph, I happened to serve on a committee that was putting together an initiative in this state. The initiative was 276, which is now known as the Open Government Law. And the argument that was waged inside that committee was, well, we don't care so much about money if the people know where it is coming from.
Well, the problem is that today the people don't know where the money's coming from. The money makes so many fast moves from campaign to campaign and from PAC to PAC and from individual to individual, but I don't believe that today we really do know where the money's coming from. There's no way to trace it anymore. And so I believe that it's time we considered having a special filing with the Public Disclosure Commission for transfers, or what some have called washing the money between campaigns and between issues. Secondly, people have learned the exact details of the public disclosure law, and they know when to make their contributions so it can't be picked up by the press. And perhaps we need regulations that call for reporting of anticipated contributions. There's a whole host of steps that we better take to tighten up the law.
Well, I suppose if I were a typical citizen watching this, I might say, but Mr. Munro, you're not talking about me. I study issues. I make up my mind. I vote for the person of my choice for that office. Money can't buy my vote.
Well, I would argue back that, in fact, we might be talking about the individual citizen more than they want to admit. I would challenge any individual teacher to tell me where their money ended up. I would challenge any individual electrical worker to tell me where their money ended up. I would challenge any small business to tell me where their money finally ended up. There's no saints in this business. It's labor, it's business, it's all sides. The problem is that we need to go back and reevaluate the system and determine if we shouldn't make some basic changes.
Let's get to a very basic thing. Do you think that money literally buys elections?
I'm not so sure that money buys elections, but it certainly influences elections. And money can buy the necessary things to have a strong influence on elections. I noticed recently they've been talking about a truth in politics law at the national level, which may require a constitutional amendment, which would basically require a candidate to go before the people with no props, no help from the media, no filming of Cuba or food lines or whatever it happens to be, but just stand there as an individual citizen, much like Mr. Lincoln and Mr. Douglas had to do, and tell the public exactly what you intend to do for them, without the backdrops and the media and the multi-million-dollar propaganda machines that are put together.
Let's take a candidate who raised a lot of money, Senator Henry Jackson, about $2 million in a war chest. But I understand federal law would not allow him to take that money and parcel it out to somebody else in sums of over $1,000 because of a federal law. But now suppose I'm Joe Blatt, and I'm running for state office, and somehow I raise $2 million. Is there any law that says I can't spend that money any way I want it?
No, you can shift that money all over the state. If you can't do it as an individual, you can shift it through PACs.
Why would I want it?
You'd want it to build influence in the state legislature. You'd want it to build votes for your particular issues. You'd want it because certainly your friends who happen to be lobbyists, whether business or labor, couldn't give to one candidate, but they could give it to you and you could give it to that candidate. There's a whole host of reasons.
Let's not operate in a vacuum. Do you think that's being done in this
Absolutely.
state?
There's no question about it.
Can you name some state legislators who are building influence by shoving money around?
I don't know that that's fair because you could go back for 20 years and name some then, you could name some today. It's been building. The trouble is that the money amounts have gotten so large that if we don't put a stop to it, it's going to not only disenfranchise an awful lot of people, but it's going to guarantee that the individual citizen cannot run for the legislature and represent their home community in Olympia.
Ralph, I understand you were so concerned about what you called the Olympia washing machine. Somebody who will rake in a lot of money, then parcel it out in an attempt to build influence in the legislature, that you were looking for some Democratic and Republican sponsors of legislation to stop the practice. Did you have any luck?
We aren't to that point yet. Well, we have some particular bills that are in the drafting stage, and we will be at that point in the next few weeks. I think we'll find individual legislators. The question is, will we find enough votes to pass the bill? And part of that challenge, I think, will have to go back to the legislature. We have been gathering materials from all over the country on what other states do. There are many states that do not allow any corporate checks to go into legislative campaigns. There are many states that do not allow any labor union checks to go into any particular campaign. There are a whole host of suggestions that I think should be debated in some sort of a special forum in the legislature and then come up with some potential solutions. I can tell you that if the legislature doesn't come up with some solutions, that through the initiative process there will be a solution found because the public is sick of it.
You're saying that you or somebody you know will carry the ball if the lawmakers duck.
I think that there will be people that carry the ball, and our office will certainly assist those people, yes.
I'd like to talk to you about just an election and how people prepare for that election, and the concerns people have about voters' pamphlets and things they read when Viewpoint on the News returns.
If you're interested in learning how to juggle, here's your chance. I'm known as Professor Confidence to over 200,000 people I've taught to juggle, and I'd like to introduce another way to learn. It's called Juggle Bug. Juggle Bug equipment has a variety of juggling sets with easy-to-understand instructions. It'll guide you from the beginning to the professional stage of juggling. Find out for yourself. Juggling is fun and easy, so catch the Juggle Bug.
Find Juggle Bug at these White's locations.
How does your fabric softener smell?
Ah, nice.
Ah, nothing.
Introducing new Unscented Bounce.
Unscented Bounce doesn't leave a scent on my clothes. That I love.
Regular Bounce gives me the long-lasting freshness I love.
Now there are two kinds of bounce.
Both control static cling.
While both leave your clothes soft and fluffy.
Regular or new Unscented Bounce for...
Ah, nice.
Or...
Ah, nothing.
Ralph, we were talking about the force that money has in an election. You try to combat that, not just with the words on this program, but also with the voters' pamphlet.
Right.
And little things like that. Do they do any good?
You bet it does. You know, we're one of only 24 states that has a voters' pamphlet. Our citizens really put it into force in 1914, and I think we're very, very fortunate. Our office works hard on it, and it provides people with a good viewpoint on both sides of the issue. This next legislative session, we're going to ask the legislature for permission for a pre-primary voters' pamphlet, because I'm very discouraged that in the primary race, you oftentimes have candidates who are less familiar to the public and no way to really check them out. So
it's when the voter has the widest possible choice.
Absolutely, and it's been long overdue in our state, and I hope that the legislature approves it because we really need it. We're also going to have to tighten up on the actual voters' pamphlet itself. Now, this is last year's voters' pamphlet of the last election, and this is a false voters' pamphlet that was put out by a particular candidate in Yakima County. And you look at the two, and they're almost exactly similar.
I understand if you open up what you call the false one, it even looks like a state voters' pamphlet on the inside.
Looks like a state voters' pamphlet, and the only problem is that the particular candidate who put it out forgot to list his opponent. And so,
how do you feel about things like that?
Oh, I think it's just terribly unfair. We had all kinds of citizen complaints from Yakima County, and we're going to ensure that there's legislation presented to the legislature to prohibit this from happening in the future.
How many tricks, dirty tricks, shenanigans are possible under the election laws of this state?
Oh, I think we have far tighter laws than most states, and the important thing is that each time we see a problem, we move to correct it. We saw a problem here in King County in the very last election, where on the punch card ballot there was, in certain cases, more than one race printed, and people had to choose depending on which legislative district they lived in. I don't think that's right, and we're going to go back and ensure that punch card ballots only contain the race that is going on in that district.
Now, suppose I'm cheering for you, and I say, go right ahead, Ralph, do all these things, get that pre-primary ballot out. I'm thinking of running for office. I'm not. But I'm taking the position of somebody who might be viewing. Just a few minutes ago, when we took a short break, you told me, Bryon, your kid may never be able to run for the state legislature.
Exactly.
Your friends may never be able to run for the state legislature. Why, did it change the law?
The real reason is that even with all these things we do, if we don't solve the money problem, the individual citizen is going to be prohibited from seeking to represent their fellow citizens in Olympia. The money problem has gotten that bad. Just 2 years ago, we were talking about state senate races that might total $20,000. Then in the interim, we saw some races for challenge seats down in the Vashon Island area and over in the Yakima Valley, which came to $9 and $10 a vote. Now we see average races this time, just a year later, at $50,000 to $60,000, some up to close to $100,000. Where does it all end? Does it end with the California legislative races at $2.2 million? If we don't have the sense to stop it or determine ways to put some lids on it, we're just simply ensuring that young man from Woodby Island or the young woman from the Spokane Valley who were raised in average, normal households will not be able to serve in Olympia.
You're exercised about this. What do you think the state would lose if we do go down the California road?
We lose the thing that has made us the best, and that is the option for any citizen to really know that they have the chance to go down to Olympia as a representative and serve the interests of their community. That's always been an option in this state. That's why we've had real people down there who wanted to work to ensure that this state would be as good for their children as it's been for us. There's more to that than just a saying. They really believe in that. And once you turn to the situation where you've got to be a millionaire to be elected, we've lost it all.
Well, there's one other thing that sometimes makes a difference as to whether or not I should win. If I happen to be a Republican residing in the 37th District of Seattle, I would never make it. If I happen to be a Democrat running for 8th District Congress, I would have an uphill battle. Redistricting can determine in part what political complexion voters have in a certain area. I understand you have some very strong feelings about who should redistrict this state.
Well, absolutely. If we cannot see it now, I don't know how blind we could be. This state needs a new method of redistricting, and that method is an independent redistricting commission. We just cannot expect our elected officials, no matter how good of people they might be, to determine their own destiny through the redistricting process. It hasn't worked in this state now 3 times in a row. The court has just thrown out the most recent plan, and we've simply got to pass a constitutional amendment and change the system. We need a partisan yet equally divided body that can remove this process from the legislature and make those determinations. More importantly, what you opened the subject on is, how does a Republican win in the 37th, or how does someone else in the Democratic district, the Republican district, whatever it happens to be. The real importance of a redistricting commission is this. The commission has a good chance of developing swing districts. And when you have swing districts, you know that the Republican chairman and the Democratic chairman have to get the best possible person to run. And so you have better candidates, and you cleanse politics itself. The trouble with the system today is it develops safe seats. You protect the incumbents, you protect the committee chairman, you protect the leadership, you protect whoever. And the longer you have safe seats, then you have politicians that maybe aren't as viable as you'd have if you had swing districts.
For those who don't understand what a swing district is, that is one that is basically evenly balanced between Democrats and Republicans.
Try to balance those districts as close as you can, and that forces the political parties to go out and find the very best candidates.
Suppose we get contributions under control to an extent. Suppose we get a bipartisan redistricting commission. There are some who argue we need one more thing. Public money going into campaigns on some level so that any candidate can have contributions matched, so that the small person can get in the race. Do you have feelings about public funding of campaigns?
Yes, I don't agree with it. I never have agreed with it. I feel that a candidate seeking office should go out and raise the necessary money to run. It's often been said, and I think that the person who told it to me was Governor Dan Evans. He said, if you can't raise the money, you shouldn't be running. But the key component in that is finding some sort of sensible lid on the amount of money you have to raise.
Ralph, once your office was described as ministerial, just an administrator who sat down there and made little entries into ledgers.
Not anymore.
I gather that. And one of the other subjects which is tying you up in trips around the state is whoops. And I'd like to see how your office gets involved in that when Viewpoint on the News returns.
How does your fabric softener smell?
Ah, nice.
Ah, nothing.
Introducing new unscented Bounce.
Unscented Bounce doesn't leave a scent on my clothes. That I love.
Regular Bounce gives me the long-lasting freshness I love.
Now there are 2 kinds of Bounce.
Both control static cling.
While both leave your clothes soft and fluffy.
Regular or new unscented Bounce for...
Ah, nice.
Or...
Ah, nothing.
We're giving away trucks. That's right. Bell Phone Center stores have 7,000 trucks, and we've got to unload them. So if you buy a design line phone, oh, by the way, they make great gifts. We'll give you 2 trucks, free. Or we'll even throw in some telephone poles. Think of it. Buy 1 phone, you get a set of brand new Tonka telephone trucks absolutely free. And if you can't use them, you probably know someone who can.
Now through Christmas while supplies last.
Are you a Tonka too?
Little man, not included.
Ralph Munro, the guest today on Viewpoint on the News, has been traveling around the state, and you're going to be doing a little more of that, Ralph, as I understand it, trying to explain a ballot measure that may face the people of this state, probably will, on additional funding for whoops. How does the Secretary of State's office get involved in nuclear plants? You're supposed to be pencil pushers.
Well, it's interesting. As you know, we administer elections, and Initiative 394 requires that the independent consultant's cost-effectiveness study be filed with our office. That study is about 3 inches thick, and it's required of a 30-day public comment period. The idea of the initiative was people would write in, get the study, read it, and send in comments.
Have you looked at that study, Ralph?
I've looked at it, but not in any great detail.
Could the average Joe or Jane understand what was in that 3-page, the 3-inch thick study?
I doubt it. And the whole point is that we got together with Don't Bankrupt Washington and the Supply System and the PUD Association, and they all agreed, and it's to their credit. And we put together a series of briefing sessions across the state, and then we'll go back in 2 weeks and do public comment sessions and really give the public a chance to have input. That's all printed in the final report, and then next spring, if the final call for election happens, we'll put out a voter's pamphlet.
So in other words, we may actually have a vote on a nuclear plant in which there has been a real opportunity for people to find out what that plant will cost, what its payback is, what its drawbacks are.
Absolutely, and I'm very proud of the process. Not only does the public have a chance for honest-to-goodness briefing, they've got a chance to have their own input, and then they've got a chance to read both sides of the issue in the voter's pamphlet before they vote. That's unheard of, and we should be proud.
Now, let's take in a couple of other examples. Park bonds for Seattle and King County came down with a flurry of vote yes publicity, but really no forums that were established. SJR 143, which was tax increment financing or creation of special taxing districts, was on the ballot and nobody knew what it was. Can we learn anything from this discussion of Initiative 394 and the Whoops nuclear plants? Can we set up something that would expose people legitimately to an unbiased statement of what a ballot issue is?
Sure we can. There's a whole host of opportunities, not only through the hearing process, but we're also going to talk to the county auditors and the city elections people about authorization for cities to do voters' pamphlets. There's no reason why in important elections like this, which look to the future of not only things like power generation, but huge expenditures for parks and so forth, that citizens, I think they have the right to have a pamphlet delivered to their home that explains both sides of the issue. Or use a television voters' pamphlet. So that hasn't been experimented very much, and certainly would be a good medium to expose the public to the issue. There's a whole host of ideas.
Is this costly, Ralph? Would it cost the state a lot to do this?
Not near what it would cost if we don't educate the public. There's never been any debate in the legislature about the cost of the voters' pamphlet. They fully understand the value of it. And certainly we've taken steps in the past few years to conserve in the type of print we use, the type of ink and so forth. But there's never been any question of whether we shouldn't have one, even in very tough political times.
One of the things I occasionally look for as an analyst of elections is the vote drop-off. You take a look at the number of people who voted for the top office on that ballot, and then see how many people fell off by the wayside and didn't vote on other issues. Have you taken a look at this, and do you see a substantial drop-off in voting on complicated issues, indicating we're not doing a good enough job getting information out of the voters?
The biggest drop-off comes below the voters' pamphlet. The biggest drop-off, if you look at the drop-off percentages, it goes down to where the voters' pamphlet stopped at the statewide level, and from there on, many people have no idea who the candidates are or what the particular issues are. And so, in many cases, they do not vote. And so it's a matter of some concern, and probably could be remedied with a combination of some thought towards a pre-primary voters pamphlet, towards a thought of uncertain issues, a local voters pamphlet.
I'd let you calm down too much. I'd like to get you excited again. One of the things that both your predecessor, Bruce Chapman, people at King County's level, and you have been very upset about is when CBS, ABC, and NBC go out to people on the East Coast and say, excuse me, how did you vote today? And then announce the results.
Well,
what are you doing about it?
I don't have any problem when they ask how you voted today, as long as they ask it 100 feet away from the polling place. And I don't have any problem as long as they don't announce the results until the polls close. But the fact of the matter is there is significant evidence that shows in elections where the results are announced 2-3 hours before the polls close that there is a serious drop-off in the number of voters. And so we have been meeting with the networks, we have been testifying in Congress, and together we are seeking a solution. The proposal to the networks is that they voluntarily back off, and to some degree they already have. I don't know if you noticed, but in the last election, the results for Senator Jackson and against Doug Jewett were not announced until about 4 or 5, 6 minutes to 8. in this state. I'm convinced that the pressure that we've applied to the networks of the East Coast had some role in that happening. Same was true in California. In the states where no concern has been expressed, they went ahead and announced the results 2 to 3 hours before the polls closed.
That 1982, however, was not a presidential election year. Some of the biggest complaints that came along, Ralph, and you and I both know this, were the fact that Ronald Reagan's victory was announced and Jimmy Carter conceded before the polls closed out here.
That's right.
That could, I suppose, happen again in 1984.
Unless the networks prove that they too are responsible citizens, it will happen again in 1984. The systems are in place, and if you believe that they have not perfected their computer, you have to answer the questions of why do we have an NBC News team in places like Dayton? There's no question that the computer is perfected. The networks are willing to hire 35 to 40,000 staff people each on Election Day, and they want to be the first to announce the results. The important thing is that we've had strong support from Congressman Swift and Congressman Pritchard in the Congress, and I think the networks are faced with a dilemma. Do they want a bill that prohibits this? Do they want a congressional action? Do they want the continued madness of the citizens in the West, or do they want to actually be good citizens and not announce to be that?
One other quick question. We have a short time left. Can we look in the near future, perhaps even in 1984, to significant voting by mail only from precincts in this state?
On certain elections, yes, you can. It makes all the sense in the world for certain elections to conduct the election by mail. California does it now, Oregon does it, New York State does it. You generally get about twice the turnout with approximately half the cost of the election. It's only for certain types of elections, single-issue elections, non-people elections. It might be a fire truck for Yelm, or it might be a water bond issue in Everett.
Or a school bond issue in Seattle.
Could be a school bond issue somewhere. The important thing is that for single-issue, double-issue elections, it's a far more effective way to conduct the elections, far higher turnout.
Thank you very much for joining us, Secretary of State Ralph Munro, and thank you for watching.